Good morning, and thank you for joining us. My name is Johan Fleck, and I'm the Senior Director of the Atlantic Council's Europe Center, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to a conversation with Nadia Calviño, the President of the European Investment Bank, as part of the Atlantic Council's IMF World Bank Week, led by the Council's Unstoppable Geoeconomics team. This week, we will have hosted over 30 events here at the Council and at the studio at the IMF headquarters, unpacking the challenges and opportunities for the global economy. President Calviño, thank you for joining us. And a warm welcome back to the Atlantic Council. We hosted you on the sidelines of the IMF World Bank meetings in Marrakesh, and last year, around this time, when you were in a different post as Spain's Minister of the Economy, and we've appreciated the great partnership at the Council with you over the years. President Calviño has served as the President of the EIB since the beginning of this year. In her post, she leads the European Union's Investment Bank, one of the largest of its kind in the world, with almost $250 billion in subscribed capital. The start of your posting, President Calviño, comes at a critical time for Europe, the United States, and the world economy. The EIB is central to Europe's efforts to leverage the power of investment to transform Europe's and the larger region's economies to fit the green and digital transformations. The bank will be called to take further leadership in its support to Ukraine's recovery. The EIB has already provided more than 2 billion euros to Kyiv for its reconstruction, and President Calviño just announced another 560 million euros in support for Ukraine to be made available later today. And in March, European leaders called on the EIB to adjust its investment rules on dual-use goods to help build up and sustain Europe's much-needed defense transformation. So, Madam President, we have a lot to discuss, but little time to do it. And I won't take any more time. President Calviño, thank you again for joining us. And over to my colleague and Senior Director of the Geoeconomics Center, Josh Lipsky, to moderate the conversation.
Well, thank you, Joran, and thank you for all the support and partnership of the Europe Center throughout IMF World Bank Week and all our work together at the Atlantic Council. President Calviño, welcome back. It's a pleasure to see you.
Delighted to be back here.
Well, I want to start with the news this morning. There was an announcement about new EIB support for Ukraine. I wanted to give you a chance to explain what's behind it, what you would expect, and I know there's announcements further coming this morning.
Well, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me, and it's a great pleasure, as always, to be at the Atlantic Council and responding to your questions and trying to give a sense of what's going on also behind the scene, no? in these very interesting meetings at this very interesting point in time. The European Investment Bank Group is probably the main partner to Ukraine when it comes to investment. Not only have we been operating in the country and supporting growth and prosperity in the country for many years, but obviously this support was stepped up when the war broke. And we have been working very closely with the Ukrainian government, trying to identify the priorities and trying to also deliver as swiftly as possible the projects on the ground. We have had a meeting a couple of months ago in Luxembourg where Prime Minister Schmichal and a number of ministers came, and we agreed that by the spring meetings we would have some structured plan and a framework that would allow us to move as fast as possible with the deployment of these projects. First of all, prioritizing, identifying what are the priorities for the Ukrainian government with a good mix of very large infrastructure projects at central level, at national level, also some urban development and transport projects and housing building projects which are more of a municipal dimension, and supporting SMEs. As well as advisory services, which are of the essence to make the most of Europe's money, and other new programs that we're working on, which are quite interesting, and I can come back to that in a moment. But generally, I think this is a very important milestone that we will be signing today, because it shows that we have a shared view of where the priorities are, so that we can really focus the attention of the Ukrainian administration, notwithstanding, of course, the current situation and their focus on winning the war, but also from ourselves, how to really help them as best as possible going forward.
It strikes me as very appropriate to make that announcement during IMF World Bank Week. We always remind everyone that the IMF World Bank, which are celebrating their 80th anniversary, were founded during a war, not after war in 1944. So building for the peace and prosperity and reconstruction we all want to see in Ukraine, even in the midst of a war, feels critical, and we're happy to see the EIB is playing such an important role. Could you help us take a step back beyond this announcement today, the work the EIB has done in Ukraine, especially over the past 2 years since the war began?
Well, I think that the key message that the European Union has been sending is a message of unwavering support to Ukraine, and support that comes on the basis of budgetary support, so macroeconomic and financial support so that the Ukrainian economy continues to run, that the salaries of the public servants are paid, and that the country can continue to have an as normal as possible environment despite the totally abnormal situation, of course. And that probably explains why Ukraine is actually growing, why inflation is kept relatively under control, and the civil servants and also the army is being paid, and there's a sense of normal life in between the attacks. But on top of that, more general support coming from the European budget, the European Investment Bank is focusing very much in financing projects on the ground and also providing support to SMEs in Ukraine. And that is what we have been deploying and working on. We have a good pipeline of projects, and we're ready to go as soon as the Ukrainian authorities are also, identifying their priorities and moving ahead with the implementation on their end. And as I was giving you a sneak preview before, on top of these more traditional instruments, loans, we also are managing grants from the European budget, SME support from financial institutions. We're working on an export credit guarantee, an insurance mechanism, so that we can reinsure the existing national systems, and we can really support European companies, EU companies exporting to Ukraine and starting to build up the country. As you're rightly saying, we need to start doing it now, not wait until the war is over, to set the basis for a resilient economy in Ukraine.
This insurance, that seems critical, and I mean, this will unlock, we've talked about this before in Ukrainian reconstruction, the ability to unlock private capital and get that back flowing into Ukraine. That's a really welcome announcement. I want to talk a little bit how you deconflict. There's so much support coming to Ukraine from different sources. Of course, EIB, EU budget is used. We hope more from the U.S. Congress. We'll wait for news this weekend that we're optimistic about, but we will see. But how does all of this actually get channeled productively on the ground when different support is coming from different? There's the releasing and allocating of the money, but then there's the actual disbursement and making sure it's spent as intended.
Well, that requires two issues. First of all is the administrative capacity of the Ukrainian authorities, which are obviously now focused not exactly in some of these investments, but rather in being strong on the front line. But it is, I think, just as important that back home the houses are being rebuilt, the public buildings are being reinforced, infrastructures in the energy and transport sector are being repaired, after the attacks, and that we strengthen in general the infrastructure building of the country, and that SMEs continue to function. And so that's what the EIB is really specializing on, supporting those projects that need to be implemented, and that requires this good understanding with the Ukrainian facilities, so that authorities, so that we can be as effective as possible on the ground. And the second necessary element, which is another of the highlights of this week actually, is close cooperation and synergy exploitation between the different multilateral development banks and also bilateral investors, because we are doing it quite well, and we are very committed to it. But ideas such as mutual reliance are of the essence. We are not going to duplicate the requirements, duplicate the exercises there in Ukraine. We're working very closely with the EBRD, the World Bank, but also with UNDP, for example, the United Nations Development Program, so that we make sure that the experts that are on the ground are providing the most efficient service, if I may put it this way, to all of us at this crucial point in time.
I'm glad you raised that. I wanted to talk about how the MDBs can work together. So we'll get to that in a moment. But one more on Ukraine. I wanted to talk about how EIB funding could potentially in the future go to arms or military capacity. This issue has been raised. Several EU members raised this. How do you see that, how the EIB and the projects they spend on now versus what some members of the EU are asking for the EIB to spend on in the future?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that there can be no doubt that we need to reinforce Europe's security and defense industry. And this requires us to mobilize all available instruments. The European Investment Bank Group actually has been investing in this area for the past 8 years. We created a dedicated program. We earmarked an amount of money, 6 billion euros at the beginning, to support this industry. This was upgraded to 8 billion euros when the war broke. And of these amounts, only 2 billion euros have been invested so far. So that gives us a good financial envelope that we need to deploy as fast as possible and trying to help as much as possible the industry. And that's why for the past months, we have been engaging very actively with member states, with the industry, also with financial markets to calibrate well our actions. And only last Friday, I presented to finance ministers an immediate action plan, and they welcomed it. They were very supportive, and now we will finalize the internal processes so as to deploy the plan in the coming weeks and months.
So this is in the works, thinking about it, but already, as you said, money goes to support these in various ways. I want to talk about some of the EIB's other priorities. You've called the EIB, and the EIB has been called before the Climate Bank. And I wonder, I know there were new announcements yesterday with Bhutan, we saw that, and curious how you see the EIB's role, both in the EU, but beyond the EU, when it comes to climate finance.
I think, I mean, and this is probably one of the areas where I think there is a shared pride in the bank, and I've been there for 3 months and for, barely 3-4 months, and I see how people are so proud that we have consolidated our brand as the climate bank. And it is so because not only because we have more than 50% of our investments are green investments, and not only because we have been operating and deploying and supporting some of the most innovative technologies, the breakthrough technologies that will allow us to move to a net zero economy, from green hydrogen to circular economy, gigafactories for batteries, solar panel production, new fuels, new green fuels, renewables. Obviously, the EIB is probably the largest investor in energy grids, renewable energy production facilities in Europe. So not only because of that, but because this green agenda is really ingrained in everything we do, inside and outside the EU. And so, I mean, you're referring rightly, yesterday we had a number of meetings with Tajikistan, with Bhutan, with Barbados, and all of them were talking about green finance. I think our role is being quite important, from tramway and underground infrastructures in India, where we're financing the key works, or in Latin America, to these kind of very strategic investments that are actually going to allow green energy to be flowing in quite critical and strategic regions of the world.
Is the non-EU portion of EIB spending, is that growing as a percentage of the portfolio?
Well, it has grown in the last years. We are now around 8 billion euros per year. This is around 10% of our yearly investments. Last year we did 88 billion euros we signed investments for 88 billion euros, of which 8 outside the EU. Our plan for this year is around 95 billion euros. We have a very large balance sheet, around 600 billion euros balance sheet, a very balanced portfolio inside the EU, outside the EU, large projects, support to SMEs, and that is what explains the strength, the extraordinary strength, financial strength of the EIB group, with AAA plus rating, 32% core tier 1 capital. I mean, I don't want to bore the audience with
this is the right
data,
audience for that. Okay. You've come to the right place.
But really, the bank is a very strong bank with a very low non-performing assets, very strong technical skills. I would say it's not only the financial expertise, it is an engineer's bank also. So the projects are well assessed. That's what I told yesterday, the different counterparts. I had the Prime Minister of Tajikistan, and I was telling them, the finance ministers, and also, of course, the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley. And what I told them is, if we are financing this project, it's because this is a good project. And this kind of respect from the market is also very relevant. It's not only the financial support and the good advantageous interest rates that we can offer, but the fact that once the EIB says this is a good project, many public and private investors chip in.
It's a signal, right?
It
that
is
the
a
EIB's
signal.
endorsement
Indeed.
and support of a project.
Yes.
But going back to your point earlier about MDBs, obviously the World Bank has now made climate a major priority. We even saw them update the mission statement when you walk into the atrium of the World Bank, we noticed that. So how do you deconflict? How do you make sure that MDBs working with the World Bank are complementing each other through these investments and leveraging more versus coming into the same program?
Well, I think that there is momentum now and a shared awareness and commitment to reinforce our multilateral development bank family, the network. I think Ilan Goldfein, who's currently chairing the MDB network from the Inter-American Development Bank, he's doing a brilliant job because he is really pushing us to deliver concrete results and take concrete measures to improve the way we work together. And I must say his initiatives are falling in fertile ground because we, I think, are all widely aware and very clearly aware that each of us cannot do anything on our own. I mean, we have to work together, and given the scarcity of public and private resources and liquidity right now, we need to make the most of our capital and of financial markets funding. And so I hope we will have a retreat on Saturday where we will be discussing concrete proposals that we're working on, and I hope that we will come out with a clear roadmap. I have been personally very supportive of mutual reliance, as I mentioned a moment ago, so that we do not have to redo the due diligence, that we do not have to screen procurement companies, several times, that we can also reduce the red tape and the complexity of our procedures. And there are a number of other initiatives that are being worked on as we speak, which I hope will be quite fruitful on Saturday.
This is a change, I would say, from 5-6 years ago in terms of MDB coordination. I didn't see it at the level it seems to be happening now, which is a positive. So we hope it continues. Yeah. I want to ask about another type of competition, and that's infrastructure spending. There's EU Global Gateway, of course, and then through the G7, there's the PGII, and then we think about, of course, China's Belt and Road investments. How do you, in the infrastructure spending component, think about, one, from a G7 or Western perspective, deconflicting and not competing with, say, U.S. investments and other things that are happening from development side in the U.S., and then more geopolitically, how you think about investments in certain countries where there's competition from a country like China, for example?
Well, I really think that the needs are much larger than our projects financing, ongoing financing. And when we think about the investment needs for the green and digital transition, they are so enormous for the whole world that I think there is really scope for all of us to try to support the deployment of these projects around the world. We are very committed with our partners. I think we all have a shared responsibility in fostering and supporting a cooperative approach throughout the world, as you were rightly using the word deconflicting. And this North-South dialogue is very important, and it needs to be accompanied by facts, not just words. This is very much, I think, our approach. As the financial arm of the EU, we are following European priorities, starting with Ukraine right now, also enlargement, having a successful enlargement to the east, then supporting our eastern and southern neighborhood, and then the rest of the world. I'm saying this because many people are just focusing, on what's going on in different. Yeah. But actually, from a European perspective, there is ample space to do very impactful investments around the world. And in order to make the better use of our resources, I think we really have to move from volume to impact in terms of our focus, which brings us back to the importance of the network, the importance of the multilateral framework as at the heart of our global safety net, more important than ever, I would say.
How do you assess that impact question? It's a question I've asked the MDB heads, for years now, especially this week. The money that goes out, but then assessing how it's been spent, has it been used effectively, and then how you recalibrate.
Yeah, well, this is I think a very essential issue that we need to work on, so that we can also have indicators. This is one of the issues that we're discussing these days. But since I arrived at the bank, I think I am really insisting on us thinking about our actions not just as something nice to have or something that, but rather how to maximize the impact. And sometimes it is through concrete projects on the ground. I think the underground in Agra or in Delhi, this is really a game changer in terms of not only environment, it's also security for women, going to work. It is a life-changing kind of investment, so the impact is quite evident. But then also through strategic alliances which have a global perspective. I will be, for example, meeting Dr. Tedros later today. So alliances in the area of health. We are working also with the Gates Foundation, with the Vaccine Alliance, and here the EIB can be really the authority or the financial institution that makes things possible on the ground. Through our financial support and innovative financing, we can make things happen. And that is, I think, a very impactful kind of action, which is not one concrete factory or infrastructure or a dam, here or there, not windmills or not even support to SMEs. It's something which is more encompassing and groundbreaking also, I think.
Well, you mentioned the Vaccine Alliance and the work with Dr. Tedros. It calls to mind the issue of being prepared. Kristalina Georgieva, the head of the IMF, was here last week, actually a week ago today, giving her curtain raiser. She said, we have to expect the unexpected. So my question for you is the EIB, given this mandate that you have, both with Ukraine and then the broader spending work, do you have the resources you need both for that and then to prepare for the unexpected? We live in an era of more geopolitical shocks, as we are reminded every week, it seems.
Well, it is true that the EIB group has a dual function. We have a counter-cyclical macroeconomic function when it comes to financing the EU. In a downturn, EIB financing becomes much more interesting. When interest rates go up, our interest rates are much more interesting, and that allows us right now to be strongly supporting SMEs and startups throughout the EU, and that is a macroeconomic impact which is relevant. Then we have the more structural impact of building the elements of resilience of our societies and our economies. And that is why, and this is really underpinning the 8 top priorities I presented to finance ministers in February, and they very strongly supported, starting with the climate bank, but then going on to digitalization and the whole value chain of disruptive net zero technologies, security and defense, unfortunately. Agriculture, bioeconomy, the bioeconomy at large. Then social investments. Let us not forget the social infrastructures. This is health, this is education, this is also housing. Very important issue for many countries around the world. Obviously, there is the issue of cohesion policy. Inbuilt into the European DNA is the idea you have to bring all regions forward together and try to reduce differences so that we can all be more prosperous, as a union. And then focusing our activities outside the EU on this impact, with these very clear priorities, and contributing to a real capital market union in Europe, which is also a very topical subject these days.
We've talked about that before.
Indeed, and with the Letta report just been disclosed, there's a lot of discussion about it. So these are the core priorities, and they are very much aligned with what you're saying, how to build our resilience and try to be as ready as possible for whatever comes our way. And I am confident, actually. We did have a good reaction and response to the pandemic. And this is also a source of pride. I keep sharing with the staff, the excellent staff of the European Investment Bank Group, which is, the EIB had financed the research that went into the vaccine production. So it is so good. We had been investing in that area, risky area, that nobody saw as a top priority. And then when the moment came, we had the basis to develop the vaccine. And likewise, I am quite convinced the EIB group will be now investing in the breakthrough technologies that are going to make the green transition a success, going forward.
And you feel like you have the support you need from the member states to do that going forward?
Yes, they are I think they have given a strong support to these priorities. They are also building highest expectations, in many areas, but so we have to deliver.
Yeah. Two final questions before we're out of time. We know it's a very busy day for you, and we appreciate you being here with us. One on the digital. We talked about the green component, but the digital. We had an event 2 days ago with Ukraine's Deputy Finance Minister talking about digital public infrastructure issues in Ukraine, payment systems, how these can help accelerate transformation and reconstruction. How is the EIB investing in digital?
Well, we are investing in digital infrastructures, and we are also supporting innovative startups. But I would say this is one of the key challenges for the EU, how to make sure that those startups, of which there are many in Europe, there's a lot of talent in Europe, how do we make sure that they are scale-ups that remain European? With all due respect and appreciation for our US friends and brothers and sisters, it cannot be that once a company starts to grow fast and become profitable, it is then going public in the US or being bought by an investment fund in the US, and so that all that talent is not really building Europe's resilience also going forward. So that is why we have launched an initiative, European Tech Champions Initiative. I hope we will be able to contribute to a truly deep and large capital markets union, so that we can really channel savings into investments and we can help these companies grow and flourish. The first year has been quite good. We've invested 1 billion euros, and so there are interested and interesting funds in Europe to invest in these scale-ups. And because that has proven to be a very good way to ensure that digitalization is actually thriving, on top of supporting the infrastructures and supporting SMEs engaging also and embracing this revolution.
So final question for you. When we sat at this desk a year ago at this time, you wore a different hat. You were chair of the IMFC, Spain's vice president, in a new role now coming to us as president of the EIB. And I'm just curious your perspective. What's different coming to the IMF World Bank meetings now in this new role?
Well, there's some things that don't change, and then there are things which are totally different. In terms of what doesn't change is throughout my whole career, I've had a very international, supranational kind of approach and profile. And from this point of view, I feel like I'm back home, or I never left it. I've always felt at home during the spring meetings and participating in these international events. But obviously, there are at least two main differences as compared to last year. First is the kind of meetings I'm having and the roadmap, where there are like two parallel tracks. So if you're a governor of one of the institutions, then you participate in the development committee, in the IMFC, you are participating in a number of formal meetings. Whereas if you are the chair of a multilateral development bank or another kind of multilateral institution, you are not on that track. I will, on Friday, I will participate in the IMFC because there is a handing over ceremony,
there's a formal, okay.
And I'm very much looking forward to it. But normally I would not attend those meetings. So they're very different meetings. I meet our clients, key counterparts, signing of deals, and the second key difference is that this track is opening up a whole new world when it comes to the Multilateral Development Bank family and network, which I was participating in as a governor, a very supportive governor, but now I am really, at the heart of the network when it most matters. Because, as I said, I think this is one of the elements of glue that are keeping the world together, and we really need to cherish, to protect, and also to reinforce this multilateral network at the heart of our stability, contributing to peace, and I hope to a prosperous future for all of us.
I think that's a very appropriate note to end on. President Calviño, thank you. I'm glad you feel at home when you come back to Washington for the meetings. You always have a home here at the Atlantic Council. We appreciate the continued collaboration. As someone who has now seen both sides of the Bretton Woods system in depth and through leadership roles, we thank you. We wish you the best of luck this week in Washington. And thank you all for joining us this morning for our first event of the day, of day 4 of IMF World Bank Week at the spring meetings. We have a series of events throughout the day. We'll have the Bank of England with us in an hour, and then EU Commissioner for the Economy, Gentiloni, later today. And then we have events at our IMF studios throughout the day. So please stay with us. You can find all our events on the Atlantic Council website. We wish everyone a good rest of the day.